You've been carrying something for too long. It's not visible. No one can see it, but you feel it. This specific weight that doesn't have an exact name. It's not sadness. It's not anxiety. It's something more subtle than that. It's the feeling that you haven't arrived yet, that something is still wrong, that you, somehow, are still not enough for the life you imagine exists on the other side. And then you wake up once again, and before the day even begins, something inside you is already trying, already adjusting, already fixing. But the only illusion is the self that tries to fix reality. Think for a moment about everything you've already tried. I'm not talking about external effort, work, goals, visible achievements. I'm talking about that internal, invisible effort that never stops, the one that happens before you get out of bed, that continues while you shower, drive, try to sleep. You have been trying to become calmer, more present, more confident, more spiritual, more aligned, more ready. And there's something profoundly exhausting about that, not because the search is wrong, but because it never ends. Each improved version of yourself comes with a new set of imperfections to correct. Each spiritual insight reveals another level of inner work. Each state of peace you reach always seems to be just one step away from a deeper state. It's like trying to fill a glass with a hole in the bottom. You pour energy, attention, intention, practices, affirmations, visualizations, readings, meditations, and it works, sometimes, for hours, maybe days, and then the feeling returns. That familiar feeling that something is still incomplete, that you are not yet, have not yet done, have not yet arrived, and you try again. I want you to sit with this for a moment, not to analyze it, not to correct it, just to acknowledge it. You've worked very hard to become who you are, and nobody ever asked if it was necessary to work. There is a belief that operates in the depths, so fundamental that it is rarely questioned because it is rarely seen. It is older than any specific trauma, deeper than any personal history. It says, "As I am, I'm not enough for the life I want." And from this belief, everything unfolds. If I am not enough, I need to become. If I need to become one, there is work to be done. If there is work to be done, I haven't arrived yet. If I haven't arrived yet, what I desire is beyond my reach, waiting for a version of me that doesn't yet exist. Behold the cruel elegance of this architecture. She creates a future where things finally fall into place, and simultaneously ensures that this future always remains the future, because the movement toward it confirms that you're not there yet. The effort to reach it proves, at every step, that there's still a distance to travel. It's a perfect mechanism for procrastination, disguised as growth. And perhaps strangest of all, modern spirituality often fuels this architecture instead of dissolving it. You find an idea that resonates. Reality is a reflection of your consciousness. For a moment, something opens up, something is illuminated, and then, almost immediately, the old mechanism seizes this idea and transforms it into yet another tool for self-improvement. If reality reflects my consciousness, then I need to improve my consciousness in order to improve my reality. Suddenly, the path to liberation becomes just another item on your internal to-do list. You begin to monitor your thoughts vigilantly. Every negative thought is a threat to manifestation. Every difficult emotion is evidence of a blockage. Every doubt proves that you haven't arrived yet, that there is more inner work to be done. And so the effort deepens, and the exhaustion increases, and life continues to seem to be one step ahead. Here's what's true, simple, but it may take time to fully sink in. The effort to get there confirms that you're not there. It's not judgment. It's not destiny. It's simply the nature of the mirror. When you act from, "I need to fix this to get that," you operate from a specific identity, the identity of someone who doesn't have one, who is separate, who is lacking, and reality, being a faithful reflection of that identity, continues to present the circumstances that correspond to it. Not because the universe is cruel, but because consciousness is a perfect mirror. Think about how this manifests in everyday experience. You want a deep, meaningful relationship, and the more you work to become worthy of it, the more you visualize it, affirm it, prepare for it, the more its absence becomes the central fact of your existence. The search for the relationship is, in itself, the experience of not having the relationship. The intense desire for it is the living evidence that it is not here. You want financial security, and the more you fight against the perception of scarcity, the more you try to change your mindset about money, the more money becomes the dominant theme of your experience. The fight against scarcity is the experience of scarcity. This is not fatalism. I'm not saying there's nothing to be done. I'm saying there's something to be done. View, before any doing makes sense. Effort itself is not the problem. The point of origin of the effort is what matters. When you act from, "I am whole," and that flows from who I am, the effort exists, but it doesn't carry the weight of inadequacy. It's not about repairing the damage, it's about expression. But when you act from, "I need to fix myself to deserve the life I want," each action carries with it the confirmation of the separation, and the separation deepens. Let the pace slow down here. There is nowhere to arrive at this moment. There is only something to realize. Consciousness doesn't create through force. It doesn't work like a lever that you push harder to move a larger stone. It works much more like breathing. It happens naturally when there's no obstacle. It flows from who you are, not from what you do. And what you are, not what you think you should be, not what you're trying to become, but what you genuinely are experience being now. That's the creative point, not the future self you're building, not the corrected self that will emerge after more inner work, the self that exists now, this one, here. Identity is not a statement you make about yourself. It's not an affirmation you repeat until you believe it. It's the state of being that you inhabits, the inner texture of your experience of being you. And this state generates perception. When you inhabit the identity of someone who is waiting, life presents itself as a series of waits. When you inhabit the identity of someone who is lacking something essential, the world organizes itself to confirm that lack, not because the world is evil, but because consciousness is a field that organizes itself around what is most central to your experience of being. That's why claims alone often fail. Can you say, "I am abundant," 1,000 times over, while the core sensation, the real texture of your inner experience, is one of scarcity, and scarcity is what consciousness manifests. because it is what you genuinely, sensorially, emotionally inhabits. Real change doesn't happen at the level of thought. It happens at the level of inhabited identity. And this isn't something you build. It's something you recognize. There is an image that we carry, sometimes consciously, sometimes not, of ourselves as something fractured. One version is who we are now, with all our limitations, fears, and repetitive patterns. And the other is what we could be if everything were finally in its place. And life seems to happen in the space between these two versions. The spiritual, emotional, psychological work. It all seems to be about building a bridge between who you are and who you could be. But what if that image itself is the problem? I'm not saying you don't have wounds. I'm not saying your patterns don't exist, that your history hasn't shaped you, that there's magic in ignoring what hurts. I'm saying something more subtle. The wound is not the essence of who you are. The consciousness that observes the wound, that feels it, that exists while it passes, that consciousness is not wounded. It is merely present. It is witnessing. It is, by its very nature, whole. And when you begin to inhabit that observant consciousness, more than the narrative of being wounded, not as a distancing technique, but as a genuine recognition of your deepest nature, something changes in the texture of the experience. Not because the content disappeared, but because the relationship with the content changed. The self that tries to fix itself is always in deficit. The observing self is always complete, and you are fundamentally the second. You are not a project. It's not a series of problems to solve. It's not a work in progress waiting to be finished before you can start living. You are a point of awareness in the now, complete in your incompleteness, whole in your confusion, present even when the mind says something is missing. And the most beautiful paradox of all is this. When you stop treating yourself as a problem to be solved, something begins to change, not because you finally fixed what was wrong, but because you stopped inhabiting the identity of someone who needs fixing. This is not resignation. It is not passivity disguised as spirituality. It is not an excuse to avoid responsibility. It's recognizing that the starting point matters as much as the direction. When you move from a state of completeness, even if that completeness contains doubt, confusion, pain, the experience that unfolds is fundamentally different from when you move from a state of urgency to fix things. One is rooted. The other is always chasing after something that recedes. The self you are trying to become, calmer, more abundant, more free, already exists as a possibility within the consciousness that you are now, not in some future where you have finally fixed yourself enough, but here, in this vast and silent presence that lies behind all your thoughts, all your stories, all your efforts, not as an achievement, as recognition. Let it land gently. This is not an instruction, nor is it a new belief to adopt. It is merely a possibility to consider for a moment. What if nothing needed fixing, not in the sense that everything is perfect as it is, that there is magic in difficult circumstances, that pain has some secret purpose, but in the most fundamental sense? What if the you that you are now was already a valid starting point for everything you desire? What if the life you want didn't require a different version of you to begin with? What if inner work wasn't a prerequisite for experience, but a natural expression of who you already are? There is a difference between growing from completeness and growing towards completeness. The first is natural, fluid, almost inevitable, like a tree that grows because it is its nature, not because it is trying to stop being a seed. The second is exhausting, circular, and never arrives, because the completeness you seek recedes proportionally to the effort you make to reach it. You can continue growing. You can continue learning, realizing, expanding. It doesn't have to stop, but you can start now, not after more work, not when you finally resolve that last thing, not when you become the version you feel you should be. Now, based on who you are now, because there is no other possible starting point. There never has been. Everything you want to experience, peace, love, freedom, the feeling of finally being at home within yourself, can only be experienced now, not in the future, where you finally fix yourself. The future doesn't exist as a habitable place. When the future arrives, it will be now. And if you're still waiting for an improved version of yourself to start living fully, that waiting will continue in tomorrow's present, in a year's present, in the present of any moment you reach the future you imagine now. The waiting pattern is not resolved by delay. It is resolved by recognition, the present self. This one, here, now, is not an inferior version of the self you could become. It is the only self that exists. It is the only creative point available. It is the only place where identity can be inhabited, where consciousness can express itself, where experience can be generated. Any genuine change begins here, not in some future time after more preparation. Here, there is a type of freedom that doesn't depend on anything external having changed. It doesn't require circumstances to be different, the people around you to be different, or yourself to be different from who you are now. It is the freedom to be fully present with what is, without the added layer of judgment about what should be. It's not indifference. It's actually the opposite. It's a form of presence that's far more intense and real than anything the improvement effort has ever produced. Because when you stop dividing experience into parts that can stay and parts that need to go, something opens up. The field of consciousness, which was contracted in constant vigilance, begins to breathe. And in that breath, something you didn't expect happens. Life begins to look different, not because circumstances have changed, but because the identity from which you experience it has changed. Not by force, by recognition. You were always whole, not perfect, not without wounds, without confusion, without places that still don't make sense, but whole in the most fundamental sense, in the sense that matters when the mind stops screaming and silence has space to speak. The life you want isn't waiting for a fixed version of you on the other side of some threshold of personal growth. It's available to the consciousness that you are now, not despite your imperfections, not when you finally resolve the last patterns, but here, in this exact configuration of being that you carry in this moment. There's nothing to fix. There is something to acknowledge. And recognition doesn't come through effort. It comes through rest, through the quiet acceptance that perhaps you already are what you sought. No mantras, No affirmations, no new belief to adopt. As a possibility, as a question to be loaded lightly. What if I was already enough to get started? Perhaps you can't answer that right now. Perhaps your mind will resist. Perhaps there's a part of you that still doesn't trust this idea, that still needs more evidence, more proof, before allowing yourself to settle here. Everything is fine. You don't need to solve this today, but you can carry it with you. That question, that possibility, that gentle invitation that perhaps the search can now rest, not because you failed to find it, but because what you sought was never absent. Some things aren't understood the first time we hear them. They are recognized slowly, in layers, in moments when the mind is quiet enough to listen. If something here touched you, without you being able to name exactly what, perhaps it's worth letting it breathe, returning to it when the mind is quieter. You carried so much, for so long, with so much dedication and such a genuine desire to be better, to live more fully, to finally reach yourself. All of this was real, and all of it had value. But the kindest thing that can happen now is simply allowing this effort to rest. Not because it failed, but perhaps it wasn't necessary in the way you believed it to be.